In today's episode, a family visiting a drive-through tiger park exits their vehicle to switch drivers with two tigers nearby their car. One of the tigers attacks the woman who exited her vehicle, causing her family to try and save her, leading to one of their deaths. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the terrifying tiger attack at the Beijing Zoo. Welcome to Final Affliction. The Zhao family had been looking forward to this all week. Bao and Mei were married for over 5 years, and a little over a year ago they welcomed their daughter into the world. Jia was the apple of her parents' eye, and the little girl shared the attention from her parents with her maternal grandparents. Mei's parents lived close by, and since her husband and father was often busy with work, Mei's mother, An, spent weekends with the couple. An and her granddaughter were inseparable, and Mei did not mind that her mother split her time equally between her own home and the Zhao family's apartment. She was such a great help with the little Jia, and went above and beyond to make the family's lives as easy as possible, with cooking and keeping up with the housework while the young parents worked. So when they booked a family trip to the Beijing Zoo, Mei just automatically bought a ticket for her mother too. The grandmother was thrilled at the invitation. She'd never been to the iconic site either. The Beijing Zoo is one of the biggest in the world, housing an incredibly wide range of animals: pandas, lions, elephants, wild African bucks, lizards, and the fan favorite, Monkey Hill, where there are over 100 rhesus monkeys swinging from the trees. You name it, the Beijing Zoo has it. And they offer a unique experience where visitors can drive their cars through the many acres of land that hold these animals. The zoo does not believe in penning their animals in small and inhumane cages. Instead, they allow them as much freedom as they possibly can, so that they can live their lives out as naturally as possible. The experience is as close to a real safari as you can get outside of Africa. So that morning, the Zhaos loaded their car full of snacks and drinks. However, Mei was slow to start. She'd woken up feeling a little nauseous. But she wasn't going to miss out on such an amazing family outing, and rescheduling the whole weekend would cost a lot of unnecessary money that the working family couldn't afford to waste. So Mei stayed at the back with her daughter for the first leg of the ride. After 2 hours, Bao parked the car in front of the ticket gates. He'd had a late night at work the night before, so Mei offered to drive them through the first half of the park while he kept her company in the passenger seat, with An taking over her place next to Jia, who was strapped safely into her car seat. Mei was feeling a little better than she did that morning, and she was sure she'd be fine to take over for most of the ride. Starting at the north entrance, they drove south, stopping first to see the reptile exhibit. Up next were the African animals. Lions, giraffes, and rhinos were all present. Just as their third hour in the park came to an end, they saw the tropical birds and the northern bears. That's around the time that little Jia nodded off. The toddler was long past her nap time, and she was most likely going to be out like a light for the rest of the ride. All in all, the morning had been an enjoyable one, but by noon, Mei was starting to feel ill again. The heat of the afternoon sun beat down on her, and she went from feeling slightly queasy to feeling downright faint with nausea. Just as they turned into the south wing of the park, entering the tiger enclosure, An noticed her daughter's pale complexion and encouraged her to switch places with Bao. They were past the halfway point by now, just where Mei agreed she would ride to. And even Mei had to admit that it was time to swap places with her husband before the dashboard became painted with the contents of her stomach. None of the occupants of the car had anything else on their minds other than making the change in drivers. It genuinely did not occur to them that they were in any danger at all. Up until this point, all of the animals had been behind sturdy fences or in cages. But in reality, the tiger exhibit and Monkey Hill were the two most popular attractions for a very specific reason. You could drive your car right into the wild animals' enclosures, with only the walls of your metallic vehicle around you for protection. All of the animals were fed on a strict schedule, so they were never hungry enough to pose a serious threat. And armored vehicles were parked with armed personnel inside every few meters or so as an extra precaution. None of the 3 adults in the car had even seen any stirrings of life in the exhibit just yet. They had driven only a few feet into it before Mel put the car into park. She released her safety belt, opened the door, and got out. Even the 2 Siberian tigers that were hidden in the trees were taken by surprise. Never in their entire lives of captivity had a human walked so freely amongst them. It was always just cars that drove past, and the zookeepers that threw their meat shares out of those big armored vehicles twice a day, where these animals ever saw any humans at all. Even though they were bred and raised in captivity and never once hunted a day in their lives, the moment they laid eyes on the walking, living creatures stepping out of the car, their primal instincts kicked in, and May was locked into the sights of their yellow eyes. She walked from the driver's side, around the front end of the car, toward the passenger side door. Bao's safety belt had gotten a little stuck and he was having trouble getting himself out of the harness. Annoyed, May reached the passenger side door and opened it for Bao, scolding him to hurry up as she did so. It was this sudden burst of noise from May that triggered one of the felines into action. Before now, he was too confused to decide how to react, but the sudden sound that came from the woman wiped all traces of thought from his mind. It turned into every ounce of the wild hunter that it was born to be. Racing out of the trees toward the woman's back, Bao saw the tiger first. He uttered a scream, and May turned to what he was looking at behind her, just in time to see the striped black and orange cat speeding toward her. It was so quick that May didn't have any time to react before the beast sank its teeth into her thigh. She did not immediately feel any pain, but she could feel the pressure of its jaws clamping down on her leg and hear the sickening sound of her flesh ripping to shreds between those razor-sharp teeth as it dragged her off her feet. The hunter didn't try to finish May off there. It was smart enough to start dragging her off to the safety of the trees. When it started pulling her, May finally felt the agonizing pain of her muscle being torn from the bone. Screaming and flailing, her struggles made no impact on the swiftly moving beast that had her in its grip. But Bao, suddenly free from his seatbelt, bounded out of the car to the defense of his wife. An, from the back seat, reacted in the same way. When she saw the tiger coming from the trees, she was no longer an old woman. Adrenaline and love drove her from the car, turning her into a woman 30 years younger. She ran after her son-in-law and her screaming daughter. Neither Bao nor An had any idea what they would do when they reached the predator. They only knew that they would fight with every ounce of their being to get May out of there. The tiger that had May in its jaws must have realized this, because he took one look at the pair running toward him and the armored car already speeding toward the tree line, and it knew that it was outnumbered. It unclenched its jaws, leaving May bleeding on the ground, and took off toward the depths of the trees. But the danger was far from over. A second tiger, a female, was hidden behind some bushes, but she had taken a little more time to assess the situation. She had mere seconds to react if she was going to get a kill away from this site before the men in the military vehicle made it the last few meters to the group. Once they arrived, the tiger's chances of a successful hunt went down to 0. The tiger leapt out of the bushes and landed right on top of the smallest and weakest member of the group, and that was the elderly An. Bao was already kneeling beside May, trying to hoist her over his shoulder, but he was having trouble lifting her, so he carried her in both arms instead. He was going to run as fast as he could to get her back to the car, and with May already screaming in his ears, he didn't hear or see the attack on his mother-in-law behind him. An was driven into the ground by the 300-pound animal. The tiger went straight for the jugular, sinking its teeth into An's neck, shoulder, and face. An did not even get the opportunity to yell out. The force that clamped onto her completely crushed her airways and neck and rendered her ability to push air past her vocal cords obsolete. The female tiger saw that the personnel carrier had come to a stop, and half a dozen men carrying firearms rushed out. She heaved the struggling woman toward the trees, but her teeth tore right through An's neck, essentially yanking the older woman free. Bao turned, carrying May in his arms, ready to sprint to their family car, but he stopped short. There were at least 6 men holding weapons running towards them. His mother-in-law lay on the ground. The severed artery in her neck was spouting blood out of her like a fountain, and the orangey blur that was the female tiger shot back into the trees like lightning. The men took May from Bao's arms and loaded An onto a stretcher. An was no longer moving, and even Bao knew that there was nothing anyone could do. She just bled out so fast that she was dead before they even got her into the back of the personnel car beside her injured daughter. Bao followed them in his own car, his daughter still strapped into her car seat, where she had slept through the entire ordeal. Fast forward 8 months later, and May had endured several surgeries. A funeral was held for An. Bao and May still had nightmares, and baby Jia had grown like a weed. But the horrific events of that day, so many months ago, were far from over, because the Zhao family filed a lawsuit against the Beijing Zoo. That first year of recovery and the lawsuit now upon them, the Zhao family were drawn into an incredibly drawn-out lawsuit. It's been almost 7 years, and it's still not completely come to an end. The courts did eventually decide that the zoo had sufficient warning signs set up, and that their armed personnel's quick response was the reason that the entire family did not die on that horrible day. But the Beijing Zoo still had a lot to answer for. In the 3 years that preceded the death of An and the permanent disability that May now has to live with, there were 2 other deadly attacks at the zoo. Both were staff members, and one of the deaths occurred in the very tiger enclosure where An lost her life. The tiger responsible for An's tragic death at Beijing Zoo Park was not euthanized by the zoo. Instead, it remained in an enhanced enclosure away from the public to prevent any other park visitors from meeting their terrifying final affliction.